Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial. If you've noticed, the thumbnail's a little different this time because this is going to be the start of a new series for Marmoset Toolbag. I think the presentation is just as important as your material. It helps you draw people in and makes your material shine and look more interesting and fine tune it to show it in the best light. Alright, so here I have a loose list of things that I want to cover. I didn't rehearse this video or anything, but I did do like 15 takes on this opening. But this way you can see what's coming up and you know what to expect and maybe skip around the video to the things that you might want to look at. With that said, we do have a lot to cover, so let's jump right into it. So first thing on the list, what is Marmoset Toolbag anyways? According to Google, I'm just reading off the AI overview. Marmoset Toolbag is a 3D artist toolkit that includes tools for rendering, texturing, baking, and scene editing. It can do a lot of things. I mainly just use it for rendering my textures. So that's basically what we're going to be focusing on since we're mainly a substance designer channel, but we're expanding. It's a work in progress. So that's what Marmoset Toolbag is. Alright, so we have a new file, a blank, fresh, right out of the oven file here in Marmoset. I'm just going to walk you guys through briefly, what is what. Like I said, I only use Marmoset for very specific reasons, so there's a lot I don't know. So if I missed something or you think there's something very useful, please comment and let the rest of the class know. Okay, so on your left here, this is where all your things that you spawn in or use are going to be. Your materials are going to be on the right side here. And then you have your viewport in the middle. Right, that's pretty much it. I don't really bother with these tabs here. Because you can do texturing in here, like kind of like Substance Painter, I think. But I've never used it. And then if you want to have animations, that's also done in this tab. But these are just kind of like presets. You don't have to use these. Alright, let's just go to classic. God, why is it? You know what? We're just gonna. Oh god. Hold on. Okay, I closed it and opened it again. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so that's basically it for UI basics. I'll explain more as I start using things. So number 3. Okay, so first things first. We need something to apply our materials to, our textures on. So if I hit this button, it doesn't really. I don't think Marmoset has like default shapes to render on. Maybe it does, but I don't know. But what I've done is, if you guys remember in Substance Designer, we do have these shapes here that we can use. So for example, sphere 2 tiles. We can take these shapes from Substance Designer and use them in Marmoset. So I do have this ready. Obviously, my file path is going to be different, and because I'm using the Steam version of Substance Designer, it's going to be different. But basically, find where your Substance Designer, is installed. Go to Resources, go to View 3D, and then go to Shapes. Now, for some reason, not all the shapes are here, but a lot of the useful ones like cloth, rounded cube, cylinder, and sphere 2 tiles are here. Now I suggest saving these guys, or the ones that you want, into a separate folder that every time you make a new Marmoset scene, you can just pull from. That way you don't have to go in here into the designer file. Okay. Now, like I said, not every shape from designer is here for some reason. I've tried looking for the other ones, but I had no success with that. So I'm going to show you guys how to create a simple plane, because that's usually what I use, because a lot of our materials that we do are surfaces. So a plane is best for that. Um, so this is Blender. This is what I'm most familiar with. I know a little bit of Maya and 3ds, but I prefer Blender. So basically, what we need to do is create a simple plane. Now, this plane is 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters. It's pretty massive, but that's not important. The important thing here is that we have a subdivided plane because we need vertices for our height map to use. The more vertices, the more um, the more you can get out of your height map. If you only have, let's just say, if you only have this, you're not going to get much information. Similar to, or resolution. Similar to Designer, if you were to do a normal plane, you can see there's some deforming, but it's very low resolution because there's only like a few vertices. But if you go to plane high res for high resolution, you can get way more detail because there are more vertices. And as you guys know from watching previous Designer tutorials, you can increase the amount of vertices or resolution, or in Designer called tessellation factor. You can see that you're getting less detail and you're getting more and more and more. And that's basically what we're doing by subdividing. Let me move that out of here. By subdividing. But you don't want to subdivide a plane into oblivion, because in Marmoset there is a way to increase the subdivisions. So this is like a level 1, and then you can use different levels in Marmoset, and we'll go over that. But let's make a plane. So, I just made a plane. Don't unwrap it, or if you're using a different software and you do need to unwrap, do so. But in Blender, when you bring in a plane, it's automatically unwrapped. So I don't want to mess with the unwrap, but I do want to change the size. So I'm just going to go by 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters. Just make sure it's a square. Yeah, you can do whatever size you want. Just make sure it's a square. And then, by default, a plane has 4 vertices. So if you're using Blender, just go into edit mode, right click, hit subdivide, and then we want to hit subdivide. I think it's 5 times. So I'm just going to hit subdivide again, and then one more time. And I think that should be the same. Oh no, one more time. Once you've done that, name your plane, whatever you want to call it. So in my I called it high res plane. And then you go to file, you go to export, go here. Find wherever you want to export it to. Like I said, I suggest you have like a default shape folder, and then do selected objects. So you make sure you only export what you select. Object types, mesh, and then just uncheck bake animation. Everything else can stay the same. These are the default settings that I use. And then hit export. Okay, we're done with this. Once you've done that, now when you hit this little cube here in Marmoset, this is how you spawn in shapes. Go to where your stuff is saved, and then let's spawn in our high-res plane. Okay, so these are the shapes I have. I've edited some, but here's my plane high-res. All right, where'd it go? Okay, so you just have to like rotate. I think it was like perfect eye level, so it's looking invisible. Okay, so to spin your camera around, hold left alt, and then click on the screen with the left mouse button, and then drag. And then if you want to pan around, hold alt again, and then press down on your mouse wheel and then move your mouse to move around. Okay, let me look at the list. Wow, we're already up to number 6. Okay, how to add your own maps. So in the if you go to Substance Designer, now this is a preview of the next material tutorial we're gonna do. But basically, if you go here into your Explorer, right-click your graph, hit Export Outputs as bitmaps. Here's where you can export your textures. I am using PNGs. Find a location for where you want to export it to. You can change the name of things here. And then I leave everything to raw except base color. That stays at sRGB. And if you're trying to export into like Unreal Engine, I do have a tutorial for that. And where I go over settings and stuff. Alright, I already have this exported, so I'm not going to export it again. But I just wanted to show you guys where that was. Okay. So by default, you do start with this default material. I just ignore it. If you hit this little button here with the plus sign, you can create a new one. And I'm going to call this one like concrete tiles. And then I have my folder here with my outputs from Substance Designer. Now these are 4K textures. So I'm just going to slot them in. First, you have to, if you're using height map, that's called displacement here in Marmoset. By default, any new material, it's turned off. So hit this little drop down here and then do height. And then you'll open up a slot for your height. So I'm taking the height map and I'm just clicking and dragging and I'm dropping it into the box here. And then next we have surface, which if you look here, it says normal map. So I'm dropping in my normal map. Now albedo is your base color. So I'm dropping that in there. Then we have micro surface, which is our roughness. So where's my roughness? Here it is. And then I'm going to scroll back down. These are some fancy settings that I don't really bother with. We have emission here. We'll touch on that a little later. And then we have occlusion. I've never really played around with advanced occlusion yet. I just do this normal occlusion here. And then it asks for 2 maps, the half occlusion map and cavity map. I personally, and this could be wrong, I just drop my occlusion map on both of these. And then I'll show you, we'll go over the settings. But that is basically, I think and we have metallic. Where's metallic? Reflectivity. It says metalness map here. Let's just drop our metallic on there. All right, we don't need this anymore. Okay, so now that we have our material, our texture slotted in, on our material stuff here, let's just click and drag and drop it onto whatever surface you want to apply it to. So then there you can see that we have our material applied, and you can see that the resolution is not very high. It's got enough to make out some tiles, but that's it. Now let's fix that real quick before we start going over these settings here. So if you look on the left side here on your scene list, when you click on this plane, it'll select your plane. Now, for some reason, I don't know why it does this, but it has like 2 things. This is like the file that you import, and then this is the geometry. I think it works something like that. But basically, go into the lower. Oh, and there's even another one. So go into the one with the blue cube, and you'll see here it says subdivision, and it's using the Catmull and Clark mode. which is a standard. Sometimes I change it, but that's like 1% of the time. So you'll see here, you'll see subdivide. You want to make sure that you turn that on. And you'll see that it just kind of did something, but it's not doing enough. Now, subdivision level, this is where you can increase the resolution. So let's say we go to 2. You can see that we're kind of getting more. Let's go again. We're getting a little bit more. A little bit more. I tend to do 5 when I'm like setting up my scene, and then when it's time to render, I'll go to 6. Because obviously the higher you go, the more memory and VRAM it takes up. Because see, this one has 2 million triangles and 1 million vertices. So it will start to slow down a little bit depending on your system specs. But that's how you increase resolution. And like I said, when I'm ready to render, I'll throw this up to 6. But we'll leave it at 5 for now. So you can see that it's doing something. Now if we pan inside, you can see that these concrete tiles are pretty massive. So let's go to our material here and let's see what kind of settings we have to play with. So we'll just go down the list. So texture is where you can increase your tiling. So if you see here's this texture tiling, by default it's set to 1. You can increase this just like in Designer, like in Unreal. We can make it 1 tile. Sometimes I'll mess with this when I'm trying to get like a large shot where it shows a lot of the tiles. I'll increase this to like 2. But for the most part, you can just stick with 1. If you're trying to get like the perfect shot, sometimes you need to move around your texture. Now in that case, you can move, like let's say this is like my camera right here. Let's say I want this shot, but I want to line up my lines better. Let's say I want this line here to match up with this corner down here. You can move the mesh. So like in that case, I'm moving the plane. Oh, also, this transform drop down, you can click it and you can see like the world transform. So if you accidentally move something and you want to like zero it out, that's where you can go do it. But yeah, let's say this is the perfect shot and you want this, you can move the geometry, or you can go here and change your offset. So U is this direction. So I'm not actually moving the geometry, I'm just moving the texture. And then you can offset in the other direction. That way you can line up your, like I said, imagine if you want this line to match up with the bottom corner there. Oh, we had it there. What was that, 85? Like 80. Yeah, so I use this sometimes instead of having to move the geometry around. But sometimes I will move the geometry around, but you know, whatever you like. So I'm just gonna zero this out. Oops, not that one. Here you can tile in one direction. I don't know why you would ever want to do this, because it'll just stretch it in one direction. But you know, it's there. I don't really mess around with these things here, so I don't really know what they do. This thing increases quality, but I forget where. I used it recently, but I already forget. Yeah, higher value better, but reduced performance. So I'm trying to remember where is it more noticeable? I see flickering, but I don't know. I'm not gonna pretend to know. Filter you definitely want on because it just makes it look better. If you look here, oh, it almost looks like it's not smoothed, and then it is smoothed. But yeah, pixelated text, blah 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 blah. Okay, so that's it for texture. Let's go to the next one. Actually, I'm gonna close all these so we don't get confused, and then we'll open them as we go. Okay, next is displacement. So this is everything related to your height map. Similar to Substance Designer, you have scale here, and the lower this is, the lower the range of your 0 and 1 is. So you can see that if I lower this all the way, it's looking pretty shallow. But if we increase this, it's going deeper. So I think that the default, I think 0.05 is the default. I think that's way too high. I always cut it in half as soon as I, add my maps, and then kind of go from there. Sometimes I'll go to like 0.02 or even 0.15, 0.01 sometimes. But yeah, just play around with that to your liking. Let's go with 0.15 for this one. Scale center is where where the center is. So you can lower it or increase it. I just leave it. I don't worry about these two. I just kind of leave those as they are. And that's pretty much it for displacement. Now let's go to surface. Now this one's kind of important because if you are working in Substance Designer with DirectX, Marmoset works in OpenGL, I believe. Don't quote me on that. So what that means is that we have to flip our green channel, which is the Y channel, every time you export or you work in DirectX in Designer. If you work in OpenGL in Designer, then you don't have to worry about this. But I'll show you. So if you notice here, the light source is coming from over in this direction, but for some reason the light is hitting, it looks like the light is hitting from our point of view. And that's because our normal is in, our green channel is in the wrong direction. If we flip Y channel, so we check the checkbox, you can see that this looks more realistic. The light is now hitting these guys, and then these guys here are darker because they're not in direct line of sight of the light source. So please double check this. If you're working with DirectX, make sure this is always turned on. And if you're working with OpenGL, make sure it's off. And then obviously you can just look at it and see if it feels correct or not. It's pretty noticeable. Because like, why is the light hitting here when the light's over there? But yeah. So I work with DirectX, so I have to make sure that this is always on. And that's pretty much all I bother doing. I don't really touch anything else. You can see you can flip the other ones, but I don't know why you would ever do that. Alright, albedo is pretty simple. You just have your albedo and you can change the color here. Again, I don't know why you would want to do this, but if you need to do some quick editing. The problem with this is that it changes the color and everything, so even the screws here are getting changed. So I don't recommend it. The only time I kind of mess with it here, if you've seen my renders on my ArtStation, I do have a version of my material where I remove the albedo, but I keep the roughness. So what I do is I hit the X here, and then I turn down the color to 50% value, and then I render this. I think it does a really good job of showing like your roughness, and it gives you a neutral color, so it's not distracting. But other than that, I always just can I undo and bring that back? Guess not. So let's just bring back the base color again. But yeah, that's the only thing I really do with this. What's diffusion? Nothing. Great. Reflection? Nothing. Micro. Okay, so this is our roughness map. Now, if you are working with roughness, then make sure it says roughness. If you're working with glossiness, obviously you would want the opposite of roughness, so you could invert it by hitting this thing. But I don't, unless it's intentional, but I suggest you would just invert it in Substance Designer if you're working with glossiness and not roughness, since they're just the inverse of each other. You can also, you have a little slider here. I don't really use this, but if you need some quick tweaking, I guess you could just, mess with this. but it only goes in one direction, and it does it on everything. So if you want to just change the roughness on like a specific thing, you would have to go and manually do that in Substance Designer. But it's there, and then you can invert it and go the other way. All right, next up we have reflectivity. This is just your metal map, and this is the next material we're going to be working on. Same thing. You can invert it to now everything is metallic except for the screws, and then you can change the metallicness. But again, I don't know why you would want to do that. All right. Next, occlusion. Actually, let me turn down my displacement just a tiny bit. Okay, so occlusion. I'm just gonna turn it on. I'm just gonna turn it on and off. This is how I see what things do. Just play with it. I'm gonna turn the diffuse cavity also off, and then I kind of just adjust till I get what I like. These are shallow tiles, so I don't really need like super darkened crevices, right? Because it stands out too much. So I think I'll just go with like 0.25. And if you saw in the beginning of my video, I did already start setting up a scene for this. And I noticed that having the occlusion be super high was super distracting. And I wanted to kind of be shallow because these crevices are not that deep. All right, so I think we have emission. We'll touch on this later because I have a different Marmoset scene for emission. If you remember the dark tiles tutorial, I'll pull that up and I'll show you emission there. But yeah, we'll do that later. All right, what's next? Okay, next thing on the list is skies, mini lights, fake lights, and GOBOs. All right, let's do this. Okay, so you have your mesh that you're going to render your material on. You have your material. You've set it up. You've changed some settings. Now, Marmoset or setting up a scene or a render is a back and forth. You're gonna change the lighting, and then you can want to make changes to your material. And usually, when I'm about like 75% done with a material in Substance Designer, I will actually start bringing everything into Marmoset, try and set up a basic lighting setup, and then start looking at my material through Designer and Marmoset, because they will be a little bit different, and not in a bad way, but just like Marmoset is more about rendering than Designer, because in Designer you just have like your default light, which you can change, but I don't really tweak it that much. So I set up a scene in here where it's more built for rendering, so I'm able to like basically get a better result or a more precise result. And yeah, like I said, 75%, I start bringing it in here and start, seeing my roughness map, my color, etc. in a better light. All right, so now that we have everything ready, let's start lighting. So by default, you do start with a sky, and that is what is giving us this light source here. And if we look on the left, this is our sky. It's basically unwrapping a sphere around our scene or our world, and it's projecting it onto the scene. So if we look at the very bottom, you'll see backdrop. Hold on, I gotta change the music. All right, that's more like it. Okay, oops. Okay, so you'll see this backdrop box here. Now by default, it's set to ambient sky. Let's go over some of these settings. Let's go to sky first. So what sky does is it will show you, the image that you're using. And I think this is helpful because you can like match up light sources and see what light source is what and stuff like that. And then here you can change your backdrop brightness. I don't really mess with that. We have blurred sky, where it just kind of blurs it a little bit. And you can change the blur. If you don't remember what the default of something is, you can right click. Okay, sometimes you can right click and then it'll say like reset. I think it was 0.05. Yeah, I don't know. Marmoset sometimes gets on my nerves. Okay, that's blurred sky, that's sky, and then we have ambient sky, which I think is the default, which is kind of like just like an average, because like you can see that it's like darker over here, or maybe it's not an average, but all I know is it changes whenever you change the HDRI. And then what I use the most is color, especially when I'm doing like a sphere render. Like for example, little shameless plug here. Like in my ArtStation, when I post my materials, this background is coming from this color. So like you can change your background. But if you're just doing a surface like this, it doesn't really matter because this color is actually not affecting your lighting. It's just literally just a color for your background. So just because this is like a bright red doesn't mean that your reflections are going to suddenly show red. What I normally use for my backdrops is 1A, 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 or la la la. And that's the gray I use. Okay, what's next? Okay, mini lights. Okay, so that's skies. Oh, Marmoset comes with a bunch of different skies. If you hit the library here, you will get this window here. Now, some of these might have this like arrow and like upside down table icon. That just means you have to like download it. So you just double click it and it'll download and then it'll go away. And then you can double click it again and it'll change to that. So yeah, there's a lot of variety here to choose from. And this is actually what I do when I start setting up a scene. I'll just click through a bunch of these and then I'll see if there's any lighting that kind of matches instantly what I'm looking for. So for this one, there's one I know I like, which is this guy here, the train station platform overlook. So I'm just gonna double click that. Now, some other sky settings that we have that I forgot about is we have brightness here. If you drag this up, obviously you can see here that it's making the HDRI brighter. So supernova, go to 100 if you'd like. Yeah, just because the default is 1, it doesn't mean you have to stick with 1. You can change the brightness that way. Now the cool thing about this, let's say we want to go with like 2.5 to start. There's a rotation slider here. You can just click and slide, and you can rotate the sky. So let's turn this back to sky so that we can see it. So we're on a platform here. I'm trying to look for a light source. Okay, it seems like the most of the light is coming from over here, right? Because you can see it on the reflection of our surface. So you can rotate this, and you'll see that the reflection is turning with the sky. Now this is really cool because let's say this is the angle that we want here. Now just for the sake of this, I'm gonna increase the tiling to 1.5 just to get a good amount of tiles. And then let's say what I do is I'll click a bunch of different backgrounds and then I'll spend like a couple seconds and I'll just do this. I'll just rotate through them to see if there's anything that I like off the bat. So actually, in this tutorial for this material, we are going to do a wet version of this concrete. So let me actually swap it out for that. Be right back. Oh, whoops. Forgot I wasn't muted. Yeah, so this is a wet version of those tiles. So I like to rotate around when I find a sky whose lighting I like, and I'm trying to find something interesting. So here I like the sunroof, I guess. I think that's really interesting to have reflect on my puddles. But anyways, once you find a rotation that you like, maybe even like here, because I like some of this reflection going on the top left. Once you find something you like, so let's say I like this. Let's say you like this, okay? Now something cool you can do is um, you can click in here and you'll notice that things change, things happen. First of all, when you click here, you are spawning a light source and it's going to match the color of whatever it is you click on. So let me undo. For example, if we look over here on the image, there's this like sign or whatever, and it's yellow. So if we find that here and we click on that sign, it's making a light for it, and it's whatever color the pixel you click on is. So obviously it's on the yellow, so it's going to give me a yellow light. Now, the problem in this case is that that light is still working, but it's behind us to the left. You can, every time you spawn a new light, you can see here that you see skylight 1, 2, and then when I click, I'm going to make a third one. So it's going to say 3, it's going to say 4, and you can turn them off and on by clicking this little eye thing, like in most software. So you can like turn them off, which is very useful. Let's go back to our sky. So like I said, you can change the brightness of your overall sky. And you can also, these are called child lights. These lights that you click here are child lights. You can increase their brightness without changing the brightness of the overall scene. Well, obviously I have so many lights that it's gonna do that. But let's say I only do the yellow one, then it's only making that yellow one brighter. Now, I will rarely use this because I like to tune each child light individually. So we'll set the spec to 1. Okay, so let's say like I like this yellow light. Click on the skylight. I'm gonna delete these other ones. And then when you have the skylight or the child light selected, you can change between different types. If you want like an omni, spot, etc. You can even change the color of the light. So let's say I want red instead. And then I'm gonna increase the brightness. Now, even though it used to be yellow, it is now red. But if I were to move it, it loses the color and settings. So what you can do is, let's say I want that to be red again. And I'm going to make them brighter. Let's go with 7. Brightness is very sensitive. Like there's not much going on between like 0 and like 5, but once you start getting into the 6, it starts like scaling pretty hard. Like 7 and 8 is a big difference. But anyways, so you're like, crap, I need to move my light, but I don't want to lose the color and stuff. So what you can do is click on the skylight, and then under the transform area here, what I like to do is click and drag these rotation sliders basically. So click and drag, and then you can see that my light is moving. Oops, that's a bad spot. but let's pick a better one so that we can notice this more. So I like this light, this spot right here. Actually, let's find a better. Okay, I like that one. I like that bluish one right there. So I'm gonna go to my skylight, and then you can changing this rotation, and then this rotation, you can move it. So let's say I want this to be like over here. Let's say I want the reflection coming from like, let's say about over here. But that is way too bright for me. So I can turn it down a little bit. Because that way you can see some of that like nice roughness contrast on the floor. Because if it's too bright, you kind of lose a lot of it. It's just like a supernova in that corner. So you want to try and like, be mindful of that. So let's go with like 5.125. Also, you can work in temperature, which I like to do sometimes if I'm trying to match like a light bulb or something more realistic. I like to use this. So you can, when you work with temperature, you're actually also working with whatever color is in here. So make sure that if you want to work with temperature and just temperature, you turn this to white. And then you're getting like a more accurate temperature. So obviously this goes from red to like a bluish white. So if you're working with like candle, or you want like a candle-like source, or like a more realistic sun, like sunset and stuff like that, you would want to use this. Unless you click on your sky. So I like to go with like the bluish white. I think that's super cool. You have flourish strength, but I don't really mess with that. What was the default? Was it 0 or 1? Oh, you have to enable this checkbox too. Otherwise, it won't work. And then you can have a light source cast shadows or not cast shadows. So let's say, okay, so yeah, so crap, I'm all over the place. Since we moved this light source using these sliders, we moved the light source from here to here, and it retained the color and brightness. But again, if you go here and you click and move it, you are going to lose what you did. So what I like to do is, like I said, I move the sliders around here, get it to where I want. And then what you can do actually is detach it from the sky. So if you click and hold, so now they're not attached. So now you can see that that icon from the light is gone. So now this guy has left the sky, and then you can just rename this like light 01 or something. And then you can continue to move wherever you want it. Just gonna undo that. For some reason, undo doesn't always work for me. It's kind of annoying with Marmoset. But anyways, that covers skies and their children. And sometimes I'll do this. I'll just drag around to try and get something I like first. And then I'll tweak the color and the brightness and like the angles. But I'll try and see like where are the light sources coming from. Okay, now let's say you wanna, sometimes you'll have to add your own, there's a word for it, but basically in like a non-natural light. So you can right click here and do add light, and then let's say you want like let's say a spotlight. Now when you spawn a spotlight, it's always going to take your angle of camera as the starting point. So when you click on something, you have to hit this thing, the translate button, which is kind of annoying. And then it'll open up the translate so you can move things around. You also have here world space, because this is obviously aligned to the angle. So you can hit world space to change the transform gizmo. And then you have, obviously the normal stuff for translating, moving, scaling, and rotating. And if you want to move on 2 axes at once, hit this thing. This one obviously is for red and blue. This one's for green and red, and then this one is for blue and green, and then the middle one is for all 3. And then similar settings as the children. It's the same stuff. You have, like we did, spotlight, omni. It's where it's just like, in all directions. You have your temperature, your blah blah blah. Shadows, like I said, you can. Sometimes I'll set up fake lights, and I don't want them to cast a shadow, so you can just turn that off and on. Typically, you just want one light source unless you're doing something specific. You can also change the area of effect, so like your diameter. So if you're like trying to bounce a light off a surface and you want to make it bigger or smaller, you can do that here. You can do a rectangular light if you want as well. Which can be useful at times. If you're trying to like mimic something. I use this for the for the office ceiling renders. Just to make it a little bit more accurate. Since those were perfectly rectangular. Okay, let's look at the list. Okay, so last thing here. Now this is very, very, very specific, and I actually used this in my in the last tutorial, the cobblestone path. Let me pull that up. If we go back to my ArtStation, GOBOs or gel textures, I forgot what they mean. Here you go. This is a GOBO light. It's like these projecting spotlights where you can put a pattern in front and it'll project specific patterns. So like something like this. And this is what I used in my cobblestone renders. That's what I used to get this leaf shadows. So I had seen people like cast shadows onto their scenes, and I thought it was just like geometry. But then I saw people doing leaves and stuff, and I was like, okay, are they like modeling trees and adding that in and casting their shadows? And I think some people do that. But I went to the Marmoset Toolbag website, and I found an article here on crafting narrative depth with shadows in Marmoset Toolbag. You can see the link there. And basically, there's like three main ways of doing shadows. You have dynamic shadows with animation in this case. Now this one was done by using gel textures or GOBO, and basically you get a grayscale, a black and white image or pattern, and then you attach it to the spotlight, or I think it should work with rectangular lights. We'll try it. And then you have 2 options. You have what's called gel tiling, which is just the tiling, and then the spot vignette. So we'll look into that. And then there's other ways. That's how you can do caustics. Then you have shadow planes, which I have not used before, which I guess is just a plane and you have it cast shadows, kind of like a mask. And then you have shadow catchers. But I'm just going to go over GOBOs because that's something I recently learned. Everything else is just basically using geometry and then placing it in front of the spotlight to cast a shadow. So I found this nice tutorial here by Rowcat, and I'll put the link in the description, where she goes over how to set it up and how it works and kind of explains it. So I'll put a link to that. But basically, if you go to your spotlight here, and you go to the very bottom, you'll see here a slot for that thing, for the gobo lights. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to bring the one that I used for the cobblestone path. So I found some gobo textures online that were free. And like I said, it's just basically a white and black mask. And the black are the leaves. And then I'm just going to drag one of these randomly in here into this gel slot here. Let's say I like this one. I'm going to just drag it on there. And you can see it's doing something. I'm going to change this to spotlight. Yeah, because I was using an Omni, so I was kind of projecting it all over the place. And then I'm going to change this to sphere. And I'm going to increase the spot angle. So what I did for the cobblestone path, and I might, as part of the Marmoset Toolbag series, I might do like individual. I'll like go over my scene basically for how I rendered it in my ArtStation, or for the preview video you see with the spinning sphere. I might save that for a different tutorial. But I'm not gonna spend too much time on this. But yeah, this is how you can cast like leaf shadows. And then you have your tiling. Now the problem with these that I showed you, these don't tile. Right? There's an N and an N to them. So that's what you're seeing, this harsh fall off here, because that's the end of the texture. So you would have to get like a tileable one if you want to be able to tile it. And then you have your spot vignette, which is basically the fall off. So if I turn this off, you have your sharpness on your spotlight, and then your spot angle. And then if you put it in here, you can go from round vignette to the shape of the texture, I think. So yeah, that's basically it for GOBO or JOBO, whatever, or GOBO textures. All right, what else we got? Okay, number 9, we're almost done. Creating cameras and their settings. Okay, so what I like to do is I have multiple cameras. I have like a camera for like the preview animation that you see at the start of my Substance Designer tutorials. I have a what I call a main shot camera, which is usually the camera I use for my main shots in my ArtStation renders portfolio. I have a sphere. I have like a wall when I do my side-by-side comparisons. So yeah, I end up having a bunch of them, and I always have a what I call a free fly camera, which is if you right click here and you can add a camera, you can double click to give it a name. I like to call it free fly, or you can call it whatever you want. But basically, let's say go up here and you can swap between cameras. So let's say I want to go to my main camera, which I'm already in. Let's say I choose a angle for my shot. Let's say I want this right here. Boom. Okay. Now, I don't want to lose this spot. I don't want to accidentally move. I'm sure you guys are familiar with like accidentally moving and then losing your perfect composition. So what I do is you can lock it by hitting this little unlocked lock. You can lock it. Now you know that your main camera is not going to move. And then I go to my free fly camera, and then I can like, if I need to look closely at my texture or something, I can do that without worrying about my main shot camera being lost, and then I can swap between the two. Now what I also like to do is if I need to move my camera, but I don't want to, let's say I need to move my main shot camera, you could move it by moving these things around, and you can probably get finer control this way, because you can go up and down a little bit. What you could also do is go to your free fly camera and then hit this button to open up another window. Now I'll move this window. I'll usually change. You can use this drop down to change between different qualities. So you can like go to untextured and stuff. I'll usually spawn in another window, go to my free fly camera, go to untextured, and then move it to my other screen. And then on my main one, I'll leave this to main shot, and I'll just bring this back. But I have it in two separate monitors. But this way, I'm able to select my main camera here, and then I can move my camera, and obviously this would be on my other screen, but I can move it by moving it around in here instead of using like the transform. And then the reason why I changed this to untextured is because I don't want full quality renders on both of these screens, because then it's going to take like a bigger toll on my computer. So I just want to use this to be able to like click my camera and like move it around, and then I use this one to like match my my composition or whatever I'm trying to do. That's a little tip. Now let's go to our main shot camera, because there are a lot of settings in here. I only use the same like few settings. The first one I always set up first is my safe frame. So if you look over here, there's a checkbox called safe frame. I like to turn that on because that's giving me the range of my camera. Here it's hard to tell where does it start and where does it end. So I like to hit that. And then you have frame opacity. I always jack this up to 1 so that I don't get distracted by whatever is not in the shot, not in my composition. Next thing I worry about, or I like to use, is my depth of field. I think this is a good way to focus the viewer in a specific area. So I will do post process. I've never really tried ray traced. Sounds expensive, but we'll do post effect. And you can see that you've dropped your glasses here. So what you can do is you can change the focus distance yourself, or you can click this little box here with the circle in the middle, and then you can click on your scene to where you want to focus. So I like to focus a little like here, because this is what the viewer is going to be drawn to immediately. So I'll click here, and you'll see that the background is blurry, but over here it's nice. Now once you choose like your spot, you have this other setting down here, the ratio of focal length to aperture to, I don't know what it means, some camera nerd stuff. But basically, you can move this and make it more blurry everywhere else but that area, or you can increase like how clear it is. I like to go between the default 2.8 or 4. If you want, you can go crazy, but I do want some blur down here and some blur up there, and I want this middle area to be the most clear. So yeah, those are the two things I mess with. I don't mess with this anamorphic bokeh ratio or this aperture stuff. I don't know anything about that. I don't really mess around with flare at all. Let's just put that back to normal. I'm not gonna pretend to mess with this stuff, but there's different stuff here. Motion blur, I guess if you're doing animations and stuff, but nobody likes motion blur except for artists. Okay, post process, this is where the fun is. Alright, I thought I had to sneeze. Okay, so a lot of post process stuff, you have exposure. You have, here you can right click and then reset exposure, and it'll send you back to the default. You have highlights, midtones, shadows, clarity. I suggest you play around with them. Depending on your material, some of these will help you more than others. Sometimes I'll mess around with contrast, but not really. Actually, that kind of looks kind of cool to make it look a little bit more dramatic. Let's reset that. But the two main ones I always use, obviously, are in Snow Penguin fashion: sharpen. Obviously, this is way too much, but I usually do 2.5. I think is pretty good. So we go from this to this. I like sharpen at 2.5 most of the time, depending on how close I am. If I'm very close to a surface, I'll turn it down, but 2.5 or less. And then I like to have a vignette, which is like the darkening around your shot. I usually do 1.25. I think is pretty good. Also, now if you go between full and draft, full is everything, and then draft is like things from any settings from your main camera turned off. So you can see what it looks like with post and without post process. And then you have things like grain. Let's say we want, I don't know, digital. And then you have like film. Now, obviously, this will depend on the look that you're trying to go for. Actually, it doesn't look too bad, but like I said, this material is still a work in progress, but this will be the next material. And then you have things like the dirt intensity. Oh, these little things on screen and stuff like that. All right, let's turn that off. You have bloom, and obviously I use this for the dark tiles tutorial, which we'll be going into soon to show you emissive, but I don't really mess with that. Those are the main things I mess with in the camera settings, and I think that's it for that portion. Now I'm going to boot up the dark tiles marmoset file so I can show you guys emissive. So be right back. All right, so this is the marmoset file for how I rendered the dark tiles tutorial. You can see here that it's a mess. Actually, it's pretty organized. Now, I like to make new folders for specific shots. So this is like the sphere shot file. So these are all the things relating to the sphere. So actually, I'm going to turn it off. And I'm going to turn on my floor main. And then you can only have one sky on at once. So I have to turn this floor sky back on. And then I gotta enable my folder. And then you can see the setup here. And then I need to change my camera to floor camera. And then I need to turn on my plane high res because it was turned off for some reason. And then I have to change the resolution of my render. So we'll touch on this in a bit, but let me just fix it now. Because right now my resolution is set to a square. So let's do the typical 1920 by 1080, is it? There we go. Okay. So you can see here that my plane, the subdivision is turned off because if I'm not using it, I like to turn it off so it doesn't cost my computer. So I'm going to turn it back on. Okay, and then this is what you see in my ArtStation. So now, what I wanted to show you guys, I always have different materials for different uses. So for my sphere is going to look a little bit different than my floor because my floor is tiling more. Now, if we go here, I exported my emissive map from, Substance Designer from the Dark Tiles tutorial. I just brought it in here, and then you get a slider for intensity, and then you can turn it up and down, and that's basically it. And then I guess you can change the color, but you wouldn't want to do that because then it wouldn't match your light source. But yeah, you just I think by default it's set to none. Change it to emissive, bring in your map, and then you can play around with that. Let's see if undo brings it back. Oh, it did. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's how you can get emissive in here. Nothing too fancy. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back into our concrete tiles. Now this is the scene I started setting up for the new tutorial. It's not finished. I'm not even done with the material just yet. Just about. This is the scene that I have set up for it so far. But basically, let's say this is the shot that you want. or you at least want to like render it out and like maybe share it with some friends, get some opinions and stuff. So to render, go to this render cogwheel over here, and then you're gonna get some settings. Sometimes, most of the time, I'll use ray tracing just to get a better globally illuminated scene. If we turn it on, hopefully it doesn't crash my stuff, but let's just turn it on. I'm gonna pause while it does this. All right, and we're back. That was about, oh god, that's grainy. Now the reason why it's grainy is because I have my, that took about like 2 minutes. I have my denoiser turned off. So it's gonna look a little noisy, but when you render, you know, it'll clean it up for you. I always leave everything here to the default. I just toggle ray tracing on and I'll render. But sometimes I don't use it because I don't notice much of a difference, because obviously ray tracing is for path trace, global illumination, and light bounce. And if you don't have much light bounce, then you're not really going to see a big difference. So sometimes I just don't use it, especially if I'm doing like a thumbnail. It's going to be so small, no one's going to be able to tell the difference. But if you have like like the dark tiles tutorial, that material has a lot of height information, because there's big differences between like the tiles, and they're slanted and broken and cracked and stuff. So you can get a lot more light bounce, more realistic light bounce in something like that than something like this, where like the deepest crevice in something here is super shallow. So you don't really need all that like light bounce stuff. I'm just gonna turn that off. Um, but yeah, if you want to use it, you can do that. And I suggest if you have a supercomputer, you can probably turn the denoiser on for the viewport, because this stuff is just viewport stuff right here. So let's say, like I said, you have your shot ready and you want to render. You go into render and then you go down, 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 down. And then here you see output. Now you have image and video and render camera. So you have to choose whether you want an image and a video. Choose your output location by clicking this thing here. You can see some of the tests that I was running already. You can choose your samples. Obviously, the higher you choose, the better your resolution. And I like to do power of 2 because cuss. Denoise, I do GPU, but after a certain resolution, I don't know if it's my specific GPU, but you can't use GPU if you do a certain resolution. You have to use CPU, so it'll let you know. And then you have your video here. And then if you're rendering an image and you have multiple cameras, you have to make sure that you enable the camera and select the camera. So let's say by default, you might only see one camera. But if you don't, let's say I hide this one right here, or I delete it, you can hit add new, and then it'll give you a list of cameras that exist but have not been added here yet. So my main shot camera that I just deleted, I add it, and then you have to make sure that if that's the camera you want to render from, you hit this. This is so that you can render from multiple cameras at once without having to like do camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3. You can select like 3 of these and then render 3 different shots from 3 different angles and settings and stuff. That way you can compare. But yeah, I just do one at a time. So I check that, I add it in, and then I check it. And then let's choose an output. Once you've selected that, do the resolution that you want here. And the cool thing here is that it'll match your frame. So let's say I did 1080 by 1080. It'll give you a square. So let's go back to 1920. If I'm doing a test render, I don't go too crazy on my samples, so you could do like 512 if you wanted. Once you've chosen your output, your camera, and your resolution, change your quality. Yeah, see, I can only go up to medium with GPU, but if I go to CPU, I can go high. And then your denoise strength, I will just go all the way up and then hit render. So let's see, let's change, like I said, you can only have one sky on at a time. So if I turn this one on, sky 3 here will be turned off. So let's say I want this one, and let's change this light over there in the top right. Let's change it to red so that we see that it's rendering the correct light. So let's go with something like that. And go back to render. And then make sure you hit the right one because there's render image and render video. You hit render image. I should probably pause the video. Great, I saved those for like 2 seconds. So now if we go to, so I'm just gonna click this. I'm gonna hit Control A to select everything, Control C to copy. I'm gonna go over here. Over here. And then you can see here that we have our new one here. And then there's your render. And then, obviously once you have your final one, you can post it onto your ArtStation or your website, wherever. Last thing is rendering video. So I'll just go quickly on this. Let me pull up a scene where I have a animated one. So 1 second. So if we go to my office ceiling marmoset scene, let's go to our cylinder scene. That's the one I want. So I'm gonna turn everything off in my main shot and turn everything on in my cylinder. Turn on my cylinder. Go to my cameras. Go to my cylinder. Shot camera. Just check everything here is good. Not sure which one I went with, but let's just say we went with this one. Now, the only animation that I really do in here is setting up a turntable. And basically when you let me show you how to place one of these. You can right click and then add turntable. I don't need 2 of them. What a turntable is, you can place something on it and then spin it. So in this case, I attached a cylinder under it, and then if you go to animate up here on the animate tab, this is the only tab I use. Let me go back to my cylinder shot. You get your timeline down here. You can move your slider to go through the timeline, and basically go to I went to my turntable, I hit enable, and then I had a spin rate of 30 spins. What is this? 30 degrees per second. And then I have this last 120 frames, which is 4 seconds, at a speed of 1. So then basically when you hit the play button, it just does that. And then, once that's done, let's change this light here. Maybe not that one. Let's change one that's actually noticeable. All right, that light, the spotlight. Let's go red, go to render. I'm not going to go over the turntable too much because it's pretty simple, but I'm sure you can YouTube a turntable tutorial. You just got to drag the geometry under it to kind of make it like a child of that, like I did here with the lights. Render, choose your output. So let's call this one test. And then I am going to turn down the sample so it's faster. And then I'm going to hit render video. All right, that render took a lot longer than I thought. Okay, and I chose the wrong camera, but lesson learned. This is why you have to make sure you choose the right camera. But you get the idea. It's spinning up there. Trust me. All right, so I think that's it for this tutorial. That's pretty much everything on the list here. Let me know if it helped you or if it didn't, or if there's more you'd like to see. Maybe there's something I missed. But also, if there's a specific setup, like rendering setup for any of the past tutorials that you'd like to see, I could do an overview. That could be part of the series as well. But as I learn new things in Marmoset, I'll be showing you guys. So I think that's it. Let me know what you thought, if you liked it or didn't, or what else you want to see. All right, thank you guys. I'll see you guys for the next tutorial. We'll be making this concrete tile with a wet and dry function. All right, see you guys on the next one.